Wright, who has been director of the Madison Equal Opportunities Commission for many years and who was involved first in the open housing struggle in Madison. This date is June 14th, 1983. I'd like to ask you, Mr. Wright, about your part in the Madison community. When did you come to Madison, and where from?
I came to Madison in 1961, and I came from Milwaukee after spending a year in Milwaukee. Prior to coming to Milwaukee, I've been pastor of a church in South Carolina. And after spending 9.5 years there in the ministry and voter registration, I came to Milwaukee on a special project, and from Milwaukee to Madison. When I arrived in Madison, one of the first things I was looking for is to see if there were active organizations in the civil rights movement, and had the opportunity to become active with the NAACP and the Friends of the Madison Urban League, which ultimately became the Madison Urban League.
Friends of the Madison Urban League.
Yes, and that organization has continued to grow and certainly is an excellent organization and addition in our community. I also found prevalent the Mayor's Commission on Human Rights and had the opportunity of becoming a member of that organization, which consisted of volunteers who were interested in opening up the Madison community to all persons. And one of the first things that the Mayor's Commission was confronted with was the whole question of equal opportunities in housing, or fair housing opportunities. And the Madison Housing Authority, about the same time, was trying to relocate out of the triangle. And there were many difficulties in terms of trying to find adequate housing for the black families who had previously lived in the triangle and was displaced. And so the federal government was instrumental in saying that wherever there is urban renewal, that there had to be a fair housing component dealing with equity in housing for all of the persons displaced. That, along with study and active participation by the League of Women Voters in trying to see that there were just and humane practices for the persons who were going to be relocated. About the same time, there was another issue, and that was the NAACP prepared a report to the City Attorney of Madison asking for a fair housing ordinance. That report was ultimately given to the Mayor's Commission on Human Rights that requested an opinion from the city attorney. And that was 2 years in coming. And ultimately, though, the city attorney did rule that under the home rule that he felt that the city had the authority to have an equal opportunity ordinance that would be educational in nature. That began the real push for equal housing in Madison. A housing coalition began. Following the housing coalition, Ms. Jonas Salk came to Madison as an invitation of the coalition, and this was in 1962.
As I've been reading these things, I realized that was a very momentous occasion, apparently. Several people have mentioned that Mrs. Salk's appearance here made a great deal of difference.
It certainly did, because her name being a household name in terms of the polio vaccine, and also that she is recognized and was recognized as an authority and had been called on around the country to share the Pittsburgh experience. And being chairperson of the Pittsburgh Human Relations Committee, she certainly gave a big push to the Madison cause at that time. She told us how to organize, what was done in Pittsburgh, and how it was essential to do the organizing at a grassroots level. And this was really a very exciting time for the Madison community, and hundreds of persons participated in organizing, in the teach-ins, in some of the demonstrations, some of the coffee clutches, some of the churches getting together, discussing in a very positive way what needed to be done and how could we use the influence of the religious institutions to aid in this great cause of equal opportunities in housing. So she certainly did was a major thrust in the Madison community as we look towards eventually having equal opportunities in housing.
Can I stop you just a second?
Yes.
there? Why was equal opportunities in employment at that time did not seem to be as urgent a need as housing? Is that correct? Or is
that is certainly correct, because in Madison there probably was almost no unemployment for anyone who wished to work, and there were very small number of minorities in Madison at that time, and all were employed because Ray-o-vac and Ohio Medical, and particularly Oscar Myers, there were good employment with good take-home pay. And there were, at that time, not many professional blacks in the Madison community. It was in subsequent years that more and more blacks came in. Even at that time, the blacks who graduated from the university did not stay in Madison to find employment. They went to larger communities.
Could that have been because of the lack of good housing?
I think that it was very true as we talked with individuals who had been in the Madison community and had relationships with students and students who were married and had families, clearly stated that they wanted to go somewhere where there would not be two areas designated to whom that you either live in the bush or you would live in the 14th district. And so many persons were looking for as many options as any community could afford to other persons. Mm-hmm. So from the fair housing movement at that time, another major thrust that had an impact upon Madison was the March on Washington by Martin Luther King. And this March on Washington dramatized the inequities and injustices and the unequal opportunities, not only in housing, but employment, certainly in education, in services for police department and fire departments, that this was certainly dramatized, where thousands upon thousands of persons marched on Washington and had a massive rally that really sent positive messages throughout the country in terms of it's about time to see that all persons would have equal opportunities. This certainly was felt in the Madison community, for over 200 persons from Madison also attended this rally.
I didn't realize that. I remember watching it on television, and that's amazing.
Yes, it was a big march. In fact, I was fortunate to have an opportunity of being there, and there was one message reverberating throughout the entire march, and it was that the inequities in society could not be changed by violence, but by massive, peaceful demonstrations. And it was noted by the officials, police officials in Washington, that they have never had as large a demonstration in the Capitol, nor have they had so few arrests or any violence that was anyway connected with the march on Washington. So that
proved you could do it without violence.
Very true, and I think that march, that massive demonstration, had a tremendous impact not only upon the president and the legislators in Washington, but throughout the country, even here in Madison. Both newspapers alluded to this in editorials, and how the Madison community needed to address the housing needs of all Madisonians and not wait until there would be demonstrations or large numbers of minorities looking for housing, but to create a climate in which opportunities would be open to all persons.
Is this 1963?
This was in 1962.
62.
And this really was at a very opportune time.
It predated the housing.
Yes, it did. It really came as a time to give a major thrust, because from there it was contagious in terms of what happened in Washington, that we must remember in Madison that the legislators in 1960 and 61 failed to pass equal housing law.
This
which
is the state law.
The state law, which would have given greater enforcement powers to the state. And so all of this happened at a time the climate was right, the sensitivities of the persons, and certainly the coalition in Madison was really ready to venture out and to get for the city an equal opportunity ordinance.
Martin Luther King really was a providential man, wasn't he? His sense of timing was.
He was, and I think that much of what he did from the time that as a student pastor in Birmingham and subsequently pastor there, and also from there to Ebenezer in Atlanta, his dad's church, that he had always sought to follow in the footsteps of Gandhi, who was really his mentor. And he felt that peaceful, passive resistance was the thing that would certainly turn this country around. He felt that how long could you beat someone with a stick or trample them with horses before the conscience of America would be aroused?
And television was sufficiently developed, so we could see those sheriffs turning the hoses on people.
And that in itself not only troubled the hearts of America, but it really brought about pressure where Americans, irrespective of their political persuasions, that they began to empathize with those who were being denied. And that, in terms of letters to their senators and representatives, really began to push, and the president himself felt that it had to be passed in terms of this entire movement. And so on the local level, leading up to 63, that we had the first ordinance presented to the council in November, the council of the whole, and in December the 12th, 1963, the ordinance passed the city council. It is very important to note that this was the same time that there was a push on the national level, which ultimately was passed in 1964, the Civil Rights Act, which was very comprehensive on the national level itself, which also included a corresponding part dealing not only with housing but also with unemployment. So in Madison at that time, the work...
You were a member of the commission at that point, were you?
Yes, I was a member of the...
A volunteer.
A volunteer member of the commission, and we hired as the first chair of the commission was John McGrath. And John served for two years or more, and during that time we began to draw up some administrative guidelines and so forth.
You were given by the ordinance some enforcement powers.
Yes, we
Your
had
complaints to go through the city attorney, was that it?
we had the opportunity to go through the city attorney's office if they could not be resolved through conciliation. This worked where we did not have staff, and of course the commissioners became volunteers, investigated complaints, and certainly was the beginning. And also the circumstances around the investigations and decisions clearly pointed out that we needed trained professional staff to deal adequately with the investigations, and also to seek to get enforcement powers through the city council.
What's your impression about where this came in the national movement? Was Madison early in an open housing ordinance? Or?
Madison was early in terms of the open housing ordinance. There were many that preceded Madison in terms of the human relations educational commissions, which Madison had 20 years before. And so Madison really preceded the whole movement in having an ordinance. We came in with a very, very strong ordinance with no exemptions at first. However, to pass the council, there were some exemptions that were subsequently knocked out by the courts. Madison continued to enforce through the city attorney's office. And
what kind of staff did it have? Were you the only director that we've had?
Yes, but for the first 5 years, Madison did not have any staff, nor did we have an office. We really worked out of the mayor's office and out of a couple of commissioners' homes where they had the files and so forth. But then in 1968, Mayor Otto Festge offered me the position, and I came back from the University of Chicago and the National Urban Training Center in Chicago to accept the position as director.
Tell me about the National Urban Training Center.
The National Urban Training Center is a center that was set up to bring in clergy from all over the country and teach them in the new kinds of social awareness and legislative programs that would be necessary to meet what some saw to be coming the new agenda for the 70s. And the cost of that was picked up by the Ford Foundation. And at one point, there were 175 clergy from all over the country.
Were you a practicing clergyman at that time?
Yes, I was. In fact, I was had formerly been practicing clergy prior to coming to Madison. So I had been active with Mount Zion Church here in the Madison community.
Was it the center not just for blacks?
No, there were clergy of all persuasions who were involved in that center. I would say...
How long was the course?
The course there was for a year's course involved in very intensive training in the classroom, but more important than that, one had an opportunity to receive on-hands training experience out on the streets, working with persons who had dropped out from society, and also working with dropouts from schools, many of the persons who have found the way of the streets as a way of life, and also to work with individuals in police departments and so forth. My particular interest was twofold. The Chicago Police Department and the impact that it had upon the minority community. And so I had a chance to work in that area and was very instrumental in finding persons at the law school at the university here at Madison to point out individuals who would be good to talk with in Chicago. And we certainly, I believe at that time, my first opportunity to meet Herman Goldstein was in Chicago because he had been deputy police chief or commissioner at that time.
Yeah. Well, I'm sorry I took you off the track a little, but I think that's very interesting that what seems way back then there was some real concern with giving people the kind of skills and training they needed for what was going to happen in the 70s.
Yes, and there were, here again, it also shows the kind of approach that Dr. King followed, that one of the founders of that school was Dr. C.T. Vivian, the strategist for Dr. King.
Oh.
And he continued that school until 2 years ago, in which time he organized the Strategic Institute for mobilizing people to a better way of life, which he has now involved not only churches, but he has expanded to industry, and he has a number of the executives in some of the largest law firms as well as industry in Chicago who have gone through his institute and also are giving back to the community through their resources and through the sharing of their time.
That's wonderful. So you came back out of that before you had quite completed it, yeah?
Well, I came back to Madison. In fact, I had 2 months to go, and it was rather a difficult decision because I could have either stayed there and had been offered a position once to become a part of the Institute, or to come back to Madison and where my family was, because I commuted. And it was a challenge because it was an opportunity to take some of the textbook theory over the years and also the recent institute, and to come back and begin to build, first of all, a staff that would be able to cope with the task at hand. And so it was an exciting opportunity. And I did choose to come back in May of 1968.
Did you think you were engaging on your full-time career for the rest of your life?
Well, I had no really thought of that, because one of the things that I really said, well, and maybe we all were too optimistic at that time, we're looking forward to 8 or 10 years, and we would have certainly worked ourselves out of a job. And I'm sure that this was the kind of thing that had been talked about at many conferences, stating that we should be looking and preparing for a second career or a third career, because this would be short-lived.
Yeah, well.
But we found out that the need was here, that we had a lot of work to do in terms of getting the enforcement mechanism set up, as well as staffing it with competent staff to deal effectively with discrimination complaints. But another part that we carried on that most enforcement agencies do not is an educational and technical assistance component, where we would educate through many forums the Madison community as a way of preventing discrimination, and also technical assistance where we would help owners of rental units to draw up the proper leases in terms of what should be included and how deposits should be returned, and working in conjunction with the tenant unions and with other housing organizations, that we feel that Madison really was able to educate to a large degree the housing industry. In fact, after the ordinance was passed, and I should mention that Pat Lucey, who was the largest realtor in Madison at the time of the ordinance, certainly spoke out in behalf of the ordinance the night it was before the council, and felt that he was instrumental in getting some of the business votes, particularly the Central City Aldermen, who voted in behalf of the ordinance. And so the thing that we had to do was to show to the community that we needed to work with, rather in opposition to, the realtors. So we had a training program, many joint ventures. One of the things that...
So the realtors cooperated with you in this?
Yes, one of the things that was rather unique was a request from the commission to the mayor to always include one realtor as a commissioner.
Mm-hmm.
And but giving the choice receive a list of nominees from the Realtors organization, and then would select one of those to submit to the council for ratification. And that has been done. And since the first commissioner, there were joint programs in housing. There were awareness sessions for members of the board of Realtors. And in late years, even last year, we were involved in affirmative action courses for the Realtors, which is required by state law that Realtors will receive so many credits each year to keep up with what's going on in their field to maintain their licenses.
Is this sort of thing going on in Milwaukee too?
Milwaukee has not been able to do as much in this area as we have. First of all, Milwaukee does not have an effective enforcement or ordinance or organization. They're still dependent chiefly upon conciliation and upon the goodwill of the community. I think that that can only go so far, that we need a legislative framework in order to create a climate for individuals to obey that which becomes the law of the community or the law of the land.
You're not harassing them then. You can say this is the law. You can't do anything about it. Yeah.
That is very true. It really gives individuals who are law-abiding citizens the opportunity to exercise their right without being pointed out or harassed by other persons. And then secondly, it gives an opportunity for education to take place in a much greater way, in terms of more successful way, because you can constantly say that we are here to teach and to ultimately implement the law. And we know that you are law-abiding and that you want to participate in this. So it does give an opportunity for individuals to really participate.
Who do they send to the realtor? Are they new people, young people, or do they?
Well, there were members throughout the entire realtor's profession. In fact, some of the seminars would be for all of the registered or licensed real estate persons. Mm-hmm. And I remember some of the sessions where there were 300 or 400 persons in the big sessions, and then they would break down into small cells to discuss.
Are these one long day meetings?
These were 1 and sometimes 2-day meetings. I think the majority of them were 1 day, and then there were special subcommittees that were involved in also different parts of the housing industry, and they would meet with persons with particular expertise in the whole housing movement in terms of fair housing laws. And then we began to see on the realtor's exam questions relative to fair housing and how they had to conduct themselves. What is redlining and red circling, and what are the consequences of discriminating in housing, particularly if you were found guilty. I think that all of these things were very positive. We're not saying that we still do not find some individuals, as we would find in any profession, that have their own biases, but as a whole, the real estate industry in the city of Madison has done a relatively good job of upgrading its sensitivity and awareness in terms of equal opportunities in housing, and has also done a good job in policing itself.
Are there black realtors now?
There have been several black realtors in Madison over the past 6 or 7 years, and I think at this time there are one or two. One of the realtors who had been here for a couple of years was one of the large firms, opened up her own real estate business in Milwaukee a couple of years ago. But I believe that there are at least 2 practicing realtors who are black within the city at this time.
Well, what would you say is the general status of things now? We mentioned before about rental housing.
Yes. In Madison, we still receive complaints relative to rental units. I can only recall receiving in the last several years 2 complaints that were dealing with offers to purchase, and one of those were unfounded, and that the other one was resolved, that the person did get the housing in question because there had been something as to the preference by one of the owners of the house, which the realtor demanded his fee because he had found a purchaser who was very willing and able, and therefore the deal was finalized after finding that a person would have been breaking the law to say that only that house could be sold to a white person. So in the purchase of homes, it really is not a problem. And we do have
That is, it's not a problem for blacks any more than for whites now.
Yes, it is. It's a problem. It's not a problem if you have the wherewithal. Mm-hmm. In this economic downswing, it is certainly a problem for all young couples, irrespective or irregardless of ethnicity, because the interest is so very high, the down payment is so large. However, in the last 3 or 4 months, interest is going down, plus there are several new programs subsidized by the federal government where persons can get in now who are young and pay much smaller now while the earning power is low, and later on in their careers the notes will be larger monthly, which does give additional persons an opportunity to buy. In rental, however, we do see one big need at this point, and that is in the area of families who have several children, 3 or more, mm-hmm. that it's very difficult to rent in the city of Madison. And even where there are units large enough that the owners will say no children allowed. The Madison EOC certainly confronted this problem last year when it presented an amendment to the city council, and that amendment lost. However, the commission is prepared to bring that back up again sometime during this year.
This would be an amendment which would forbid
yes.
discrimination to families of children.
Right. This amendment was encouched in the language of parental status, which would be a violation of the Equal Opportunities Ordinance to deny parents or couples who have children, or individual parent who have children, to equal housing to meet their needs simply because they do have children. And we find that there...
It has nothing to do with color or anything.
No, it does not. It just has to do with children. And to deny a family is certainly that which we feel is a violation to that person's rights, because you are just doing so on the basis of a group that is affected in terms of the number of children that one has. Now, there are 4 other ordinances similar to this throughout the country, and it is our understanding, after reading those and the history and their experiences, that it is not that which should be feared by the realtors. That certainly the complaints, by having it on the books, you get a lot of compliance. And one of the things that really helped there is, here again, persons who are saying, yes, I will rent to a couple with kids, but my neighbors will kick against it. And so to keep from being harassed, they too will go along with no children. But Madison will have and will adopt, if not this year, certainly next year, it's sure to come, parental status. Because one of the things that we do find is that there are many, many organizations that is pushing this, and we're going back to the whole coalition approach that was so successful in our first venture.
What other amendments have been made over the years, over the 20 years? It's been 20 years
Yes.
since the sort of anniversary year.
Over the years, there have been amendments that we have, the sexual orientation, whether a person had a history in terms of having been in jail, as such. We have the marital status is one, the sex of an individual as relates to employment, that ex-offenders have been an amendment, students as a class, political beliefs, all of those have been amendments in recent years.
Been removed. I remember in the beginning there was much controversy about a provision, an early amendment, excluding 2-flat buildings, owner-occupied buildings. What's happened to that?
Well, that an amendment that cleared away all exemptions was introduced into the council by the commission, presented by the commission, and it passed. One of the things there was that it gave the license to discriminate a little bit, to discriminate if you had a 2-flat or a duplex, and found out that you should not be given the opportunity to make money and do it in a discriminatory way. And so that exemption was deleted by the city council by unanimous vote.
The fright, in other words, the frightening aspects of this in the beginning have dissipated, and probably most of them quite quickly.
That is very true, because it's almost like getting any new piece of legislation on the book. There are those who, out of fear, will almost create a kind of mass hysteria, saying that, oh, you're going to be inundated by thousands of complainants, or that you're going to find that if you let one person in that of color, that your entire property is going to devaluate. And when this is stated in these terms and people follow and find out over periods of time that this does not happen, then the frightening aspect begins to dissipate, and individuals begin to think of his or her neighbors in terms of an individual rather than belonging to a particular group.
What is your general view now as to the future of open housing? Is it secure in Madison?
I think that open housing, particularly if we get the additional amendment in terms of parental status, I think that housing as we now know it, affording equal opportunities to all of Madison's citizens, has become a reality, which does not mean we are not going to have isolated cases, because we're going to have individual differences, individual prejudices and biases will be with us for a long time. But in terms of looking at the housing market as an industry, we certainly feel that most persons who are looking for rental units or who are looking for homes to buy can do so now by having many viable alternatives rather than being designated to one or two areas within the city of Madison.
Has it been, was it a surprise to you how much of volume of your work would have to do with sexual discrimination?
Yes, but I think that as we looked at it at first, that said yes, that there are the same kinds of attitudes towards women as there are towards minorities, although women are in the majority. But it is certainly true in society that there are the haves and the have-nots. The have-nots certainly are being women, minorities, and other groups that can be singled out as groups competing for a piece of the same pie. It is true that the haves in society gives up nothing in a voluntary way. It is sad that we do not learn from history. However, it has been shown that there is need for legislation, the same kinds of situations that we find that have been discriminatory due to race are now happening on a wholesale scale in terms of sex. And we feel that there's some improvement, but feel that until it is really enforced at all levels, and until the whole idea of comparable worth is addressed in terms of are women doing this who are doing the same jobs, or aren't they worth the same salary of men? Until that is addressed, we are going to still have with us sex discrimination.
It's very difficult to deal with in hard times.
It's
a lot of unemployment.
It certainly is, because when you, in good times, you could think about recruiting and hiring, selecting individuals, then you could begin to look at vertical mobility. But in hard times, it is very difficult to do those things. One thing that can be done in hard times, however, is to, since you cannot recruit and hire, it will give you some time to look at your employment patterns and take a good hard look at where your present workforce is. Where are women in the workforce? Where are minorities in the workforce? How long have they been there? Are they being promoted as rapidly as their white male counterpart? Those are some things that can be done in tough times so that when more monies are available, that then one can begin to tackle some of those internal problems.
I gather you're looking forward to tackling a lot of these problems.
I think that there are a lot of things that we can do yet, and as the Commission gets ready to observe its 20th anniversary, we certainly feel that this is not a time to slack up, but it is a time to really continue to educate the total community, because there are still the kind of institutional racism that has to be attacked at all levels of society. We have to think in terms of not only the employment and housing, but we really have to think of those mistakes that have been made in our educational system, are not made in a deliberate way, but many of them have been based upon, decisions have been based upon inaccurate and faulty information that produced faulty forecasts. And the faulty forecasts then made a racial imbalance in many of the schools with the kind of attending evils. And it is now up for us, the Commission, the total community, to look at the results of these faulty decisions and to rectify them in terms of what is good, not for the black child, not a white child, but what is best for all of the children of the Madison School District.
Yes, and I think that's why it's important to have a full-time working commission that's there. Doesn't have to suddenly start fresh on a new problem.
That is very true, and one of the things that we certainly have enjoyed is mutual respect with the school community, the administration, the school board, the Chamber of Commerce, and the working section of the community itself. And I think that by having some credibility as a commission, that we can be called on to work with any segment of the commission without having any particular axe to grind, but basically to let the decisions emanate from the facts that we are able to get from other task forces, from other commissions and study groups, because there is a wealth of goodwill in the Madison community, and we have to be able to harness it in order to make our community that which we know it can become.
Thank you very much. Our conversations have been with old ladies. Oh my goodness, I'm still.